What's up YouTube, it's Alex and I'm back again for yet another video. So today we will be continuing our journey into the MCU yet again. I know, this is insane. Doing like 2 videos like within 2 days of each other. We had like, what, a week between the Captain Marvel and Captain America video? I know, it's just crazy. But the only reason why is because there's so much like Marvel news coming out recently. And I don't really want to be talking about new Marvel material and stuff until we have completed breaking down all 23 Marvel movies. Completely forgot about Spider-Man Far From Home, but you know, it's totally okay. But before we can start talking about like anything new, like the whole like controversy between Spider-Man and everything, we gotta first break down all these movies. Then we can start talking about all that wonderful craziness and all the Disney Plus originals that will be coming. I'm pretty sure next fall is the first one. I don't think anything was scheduled before next fall. So, you know, we do have until next fall to talk about all the new stuff. But I'm pretty sure Black Widow will also be coming out next year. So we have until Black Widow comes out. Then I'll give you a breakdown of that movie and all of that greatness. But we'll most likely wait till that comes out to DVD. But, so, let's continue on with our journey into the MCU with our third Marvel movie, which is Iron Man 1. So, I know that this actually, technically, this is the very, very first Marvel movie, since this is the first one that ever came out, excluding the Fox X-Men, because that doesn't really count as Marvel, because Marvel only was in association with them. I'll probably do a video on that of why I will not be breaking down any of the X-Men movies or the Fantastic Four, just because of everything. I'll probably make a video explaining that. But so, let's dive into Iron Man 1. So, first off, this movie, actually had so much writing on it. If Iron Man 1 had actually been a big of a flop as the John Carter movie, Marvel Studios would not have gone, would actually have gone bankrupt and not have gone on to making all the awesome movies that they did. So, yeah, everything was basically riding on the fate of Iron Man 1 and how well it did in the box office, and they, even though I know the director was actually already coming up with Iron Man 2 in his mind, he was just waiting for the green light to be like, yep, we have the money to make an Iron Man 1, to make an Iron Man 2, go ahead and go make Iron Man 2 now. So I know he was like really, really excited about it, but he was also really nervous because if it failed, the whole studio would have just kind of died out, and probably the heroes that we see now, like today, they would have probably looked totally different, because other studios probably would have bought the rights to them. That's exactly why, like, Spider-Man and Fantastic Four were in association with Marvel, was because they were actually bought out by the different studios. And so that's why it was like a whole big battle trying to get all of them back. But so let's actually dive right into this movie and start breaking it down with all the juiciness in it. I know that's just such a weird word, juicy. So it starts off in, I think it's Kanyum province, Afghanistan. If I said that wrong, write it in the comments down below and correct me of how I am actually saying it. I'll probably still say it incorrectly anyways, but you know, it's worth a shot. It starts off with them playing AC/DC Back in Black. In the background, we see some military Humvees driving, and then we dive right into one of the Humvees, which actually has 3 military personnel and a man sitting there in a nice 3-piece suit holding a drink. This man is actually Tony Stark, who is played by Robert Downey Jr. I absolutely love Robert Downey Jr. I think this was actually the first movie I saw with him in it, and once I saw that he did like a really, really good job acting, I ended up going and watching Sherlock Holmes 1. If you haven't seen Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock Holmes, I highly recommend it. It is really, really good, both 1 and 2, and the third one will probably be amazing too. So he ends up starting, it starts off with him sitting there looking at one of the men in the car, and then he starts to kind of feel uneasy because they're not saying anything, they're just sitting there staring at him the whole time. Then he starts talking about how he actually is feeling really nervous and uneasy around them, and asks if it's a personal matter of why they won't talk to him. Then a female airman, who's actually the one driving the Humvee, says, "No, no, you intimidate them," and basically that he intimidates the other 2 men in the car. After the ice is basically broken between them with her actually saying that, then they all start kind of talking to Tony, and because since Tony is a weapons manufacturer or like owns a weapons company, they feel really uneasy because he's the creator of, I think they actually call him the Merchant of Death at one point, and so they're kind of uneasy or like just starstruck of like, oh my god, he's like this powerful man, and different things like that. Then they sit there, they start asking him questions. Then one of them actually ends up asking him, "Can I take a picture with you?" And I think he ends up like putting out like a peace sign up, and Tony sits there and he starts listing off like all the random things that he doesn't want him to do with the picture of like it can't show up on his MySpace page, and no gang signs, so meaning no peace signs. Then he's like, "Oh, I'm just kidding, throw it up," and he's like, "Peace, I love peace. I'd be out of a job with peace," since he is profiteering off of the war against Afghanistan at the time. And while they're sitting there trying to take the picture, one of the Humvees, the Humvee directly in front of them actually blows up, and that's when they actually stop their Humvee, and they start trying to figure out like who's kind of firing at them, and I think every single one of the soldiers ends up dying, and they end up leaving Tony all alone. He ends up leaving because they tell him like to stay in the Humvee. Tony ends up leaving to go try to hide it out from them, and then while actually hiding behind a rock, he sees a missile land right in front of him. I feel like because of the scene, I feel like they tried to make a callback to it in Avengers: Age of Ultron with the like how Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch got their powers. Just because of how she explains like how they got their powers, it's almost the exact same way. Just the whole scene of it just seems like this one, because a missile lands right in front of him, and it says Stark Industries. Then it ends up, for him, it actually goes off in Age of Ultron. It actually does not go off. I'll explain that more of like what happens. Then Tony's blown backwards, and then you see a blood sitting there leaking through his nice white shirt on his chest. Then we see a blinding light, and then because we kind of see him in a having a bag over his head and then kind of ripped off, and the blinding light. Then a group of men standing around Tony, with guns, and one man sitting there videotaping all of it. Then if you actually see, if you look in the background of them, you'll actually see the flag of the 10 Rings. I'll probably put a picture up of it, probably like right now. This is actually one of the terrorist group in the MCU. They actually come up in a later movie. And they will also be coming up in a newer movie that's going to be released, I think, in 2021. We'll talk about that later too. Then the title page of Iron Man comes up. Then we are brought to Las Vegas, and then it says 36 hours before. So basically saying 36 hours before the attack, and them kidnapping Tony. We actually see like a ceremony going on in Las Vegas. And then basically it is a ceremony for Tony, because we see a bunch of pictures of Tony and his father on a slideshow. These photos are actually of Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Downey Sr. When he was younger. Then in these photos, we also see the first sight of Obadiah Stane. Then after the whole slideshow's over with, we see James Rhodes, Commander James Rhodes, who's, I can't remember exactly who he's played by. I'll have a picture somewhere, probably right now. If you know exactly who this guy is, leave it in the comments down below saying, yo, it's actually this dude. Before it was Don Cheadle, who plays him in every other movie. I really, really liked him in playing it. But then we see Obadiah stand up and go and accept the award on Tony's behalf. And he sits there and he says, well, the best and worst part about Tony is he's always working. Then we jump to actually see where Tony really is. He's actually sitting there gambling, and Rhodey ends up showing up and handing him the award, and Tony's sister and is like, oh, we don't have one of these lying around, and Rhodey's actually sitting there yelling at him for not showing up to the ceremony, saying that if he had given him the award, that he would have been deeply honored and everything. Also, if you look in the background, you will see the director, John. I think it's John Favreau. I don't really know how to pronounce his name. He plays Happy Hogan. He also plays in one episode, or I think a few episodes of Friends, as Monica's boyfriend at one point. If you are familiar with the show Friends. And he actually plays Tony's bodyguard. Then while Tony and Rhodey are actually sitting there, because they start walking off to Tony's car, if you actually listen to it really, really well, you can actually hear a jazz version of the 1960s Iron Man cartoon theme song. I thought that was really interesting that they wanted to have that in there. Kind of a callback to that show. Then Tony actually sits there and gives a man who's dressed as Caesar the award randomly, and he's like, give on to Caesar, which that is Caesar's or something like that. I can't remember exactly how the whole thing goes. And then as Tony is about to get into the car, he is stopped by a reporter. Her name is Christine Everhart. She actually makes a brief cameo in Iron Man 2. Randomly, she ends up sitting there asking Tony about all the weapons that his company is making and all the nicknames. One of his nicknames is the Da Vinci of our time, and he's like, she's like, how do you feel about that? And he's like, absolutely not, I don't paint. And she's like, how do you feel about your other nickname, the Merchant of Death? And he's like, that one's good, I like that one. So that's where, kind of, as I said before, the Merchant of Death. Then he actually sits there and he refers back to his father helping in World War II with the Nazis, which is actually a callback to Captain America 1. He then ends up, after he answers all her questions, she's like, do you ever lose a few hours of sleep at night? And he's like, I'm prepared to lose a few with you. And she ends up going back to his place and, doing some stuff with him. Then we see her the next morning waking up in his bed to a voice of Tony's AI, which is named Jarvis. I'm pretty sure I mentioned Jarvis at one point. Yeah, I can't remember exactly the actor's name. It's Paul Bentley. Paul Bentley plays Jarvis. Interesting fact about the whole thing about Jarvis. He actually, no one actually had ever met him. Because he was never there on set, because he didn't really need to. He just needed to record his voice, really. And I think I heard that it only took them a few hours to actually record all of his all of his like sayings that he was doing in Iron Man 1. And so, I don't know, I thought that was interesting. But he wakes her up by telling her the weather forecast for Malibu, California, where they are. Then we go to a wide shot of Tony's house in Malibu. I'm actually pretty sure this house is real, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I was going to look it up, but I didn't really know what to look up. If you do know exactly, like, if the house has a specific special name, leave it in the comments down below saying it's this, this is the house. I'll probably have a picture of it, like, right here. Then we see Christine sitting there wandering around the house. Then we see Pepper Potts, for the first time. She sits there and, she gives the woman Christine her clothes back, and says that they've been, dry cleaned and everything. And, then they have like a random little conversation where, Christine actually rags on Pepper, saying that she's just good for, getting the dry clean and, doing anything else that, Tony wants. Pepper then quickly explains to her that she does everything and anything that Tony asks her to do, including taking out the trash. Oh man, Pepper's showing some shade up in here. Then we see Tony sitting there working on one of his cars, which Jarvis is actually sitting there helping him out, telling him like, oh, the fuel intake is low on this. Pepper actually comes in to Tony's like workroom, but it's also like his garage at the same time, so same thing really. She sits there and she's trying to get him to leave because he's supposed to be meeting Rhodey and going to do a weapons demonstration. She then starts asking him all about these random questions about all these random events that are coming up for him in the future. Then he actually sits there and he's like, why are you trying to get me out of here so fast? And she's like, oh, well, I am allowed to, and he's like, what, you have plans? And she's like, I am allowed to have plans on my birthday. And he's like, oh, it's your birthday again already? And she's like, yeah, weird how it always happens to fall right on the exact same day of the year. So then, and he's like, oh, well, get yourself something nice for me. And she's like, oh, I already have. And he's like, was it nice? Yes, very elegant. Thank you, Mr. Stark. Then we see him sitting there quickly driving to make his plans with Rhodey, which he actually is. I think he says that he is 3 hours late for. Then while they're on the plane, Rhodey starts kind of yelling at him, saying that Tony's not really responsible for anything. Then we are taken to Bargham Air Base in Afghanistan, where Tony sits there and meets a general. Now, if you actually pause the video, the movie right at that point, if you look directly behind him, we will actually see a man who looks like he's actually part of the Afghanistan military. If you keep this man in your mind, like, because if you haven't ever seen this movie, he does make a little comeback, and is kind of, it was a very interesting thing for me to actually catch. I thought, or at least I thought it was very interesting. But so then, Tony is actually sitting there doing a weapons demonstration for them and is showing them a weapon called the Jericho missile. And he sits there and he's like, oh, if you find a reason to set one of these off, I can guarantee that the bad guys will never want to come out of their cave. And then blows up like right behind him. There's actually a bunch of memes about that. I thought the memes were like really, really funny about it. Of like that secretly that his pants were blown off behind him just because he had like so much like gust of wind behind him. I don't know. I thought it was funny. Then we see Tony actually get into the Humvee from the very beginning. He tells Rhodey to go back to the Humdrum-V because he is riding in the Fun-V. Then you hear the explosion and see the like brief like flashes of Tony actually going through a surgery. Then we see Tony wake up on a cot with his with like all these bandages around his chest. We then see a man sitting there shaving. Tony then sees that there's a battery hooked up to whatever is in his chest that is behind the bandages. Then he sits there and he rips it all out, like all the bandages out, just to see what is actually in him. The man then explains that there is shrapnel all in his body, that the thing in his chest is actually an electromagnet hooked up to a car battery to keep the shrapnel from actually going to his to the vital organs, and sitting there slicing them all up and making him just bleed, internal bleeding. Tony then sees a camera sitting there hanging on the wall. The man then tells Tony that smile, we're on, they're on video. Then he ends up telling him that they had actually met once at a technical conference in Berman. Tony tells him that he doesn't remember, that he actually doesn't remember this, and he's like, well, how could you? If I was that drunk, I wouldn't be able to stand, let alone give a lecture on whatever he was giving a lecture about. Actually keep this whole, the meeting before in the back of your head. It actually does come back in Iron Man 3. Spoiler, you see this guy, Jensen, yet again, because that is what his name is Jensen. Then Tony asks, where are they? Then a man sits there and pounds on the metal door that they're locked behind. The man you see is actually the guy that I just told you to keep in your head. It is the guy that looks like he's part of the Afghanistan military. I'm like 99% sure it is the exact same guy. There is still that 1% of doubt that it could totally be someone else that I just am not really seeing that it is that other dude. But, I like to believe it is. Then he then sits there and tells Tony that he expects, he actually tells the other man to kind of translate for Tony. He tells Tony that he wants him to build a Jericho missile for him. Tony then refuses and is, I think it's he's waterboarded because he's taken to a pool of water and has his face drown in there and stuff like that. Tony is then brought out of the cave and shown to the base that he's at, and he actually sees that they actually have a lot of his weapons. The man tells him that they have everything that he needs to make a Jericho missile, and tells him that once he is done, he will set him free. Tony then says to Jensen, he sits there and he's like, no, he won't. And the guy, and Jensen sits there and agrees, and he's like, no, he won't. Basically saying that once he has built the Jericho missile, he will either make him continue to make Jericho missiles for him, or he will just kill him right out. So then he sits there and he agrees to actually do it. Then we see Jensen and Tony sitting there playing a game, and he tells Stark he's that the weapons that he has that he saw was actually what he deems as the legacy of Tony. Tony's he kind of realizes that's not what he wants to be remembered for. That this is not his legacy that he wants to leave. Is that he's just a murderer? Because Jensen tells him, he's like, do you really want your weapons in the hands of those murderers? And he kind of sits there and he's basically no, he doesn't. Then Tony sits there and kind of explains to him that he wants to get it all done in 1 week. The man then says, well, this is a very important week for you then, isn't it? Tony then starts having the head kind of people bring in water for not water, materials in for him to complete his job of making this Jericho missile. Yinsen then explains that the men are part of a group called the Ten Rings, and that they are Tony's loyal customers. Yeah. Then while he's telling him this, Tony is actually sitting there taking part of a different missile. We then are constantly going back and forth, seeing like what Tony is doing, and then seeing the like kind of like the head people sitting there watching him, watching him and Yinsen do stuff. The man then actually, that's when he actually says to him that his name is Yinsen, and he's like, oh, because Tony's like, what do I call you? And he's like, my name's Yinsen, and he's like, oh, it's very nice to meet you. And they sit there and have like a nice little, oh, nice to meet you too. Then we see Tony sitting there working on to create what will actually soon be a miniaturized arc reactor. That is the thing that we see all throughout Iron Man 1, because I'm pretty sure like they're all like arc reactors, but he changes them slightly from number 1 to number 2, and at the end of number 2 he completely changes it into something else. But I want to say it's still an arc reactor though. Then Yinsen tells him, he's like, this, like, how much power it has, it could warm his heart for 50 lifetimes. Tony then tells him, yeah, or something big for 15 minutes. I thought, if you guys have seen Avengers Endgame, you will kind of see where I'm going with this, of that this line is so incredibly, like, intense. Because, and I feel like it has so much weight once you actually get to Avengers Endgame. When we get to Avengers Endgame, if you don't understand why I think this has just so much of an effect on just everything, I'll explain to you why I think it has so much of an effect I think it, or power something up for, something big, for 15 minutes. I think that it just is a really big call, like, kind of seeing towards the future. If you do know what I'm talking about, please don't spoil it for other people, and don't put it in the comments of like, oh my god, yeah, this is totally related to this part in the movie, because, you know, I don't really want people to have the movie spoiled for them, just because, you know, I'm a nice person like that. But I thought that it was just so intense to have watched Endgame, and then kind of, while I was rewatching this, see that line in there, and I was like, oh my god, this actually is really, really just ginormous. So then Tony sits there and shows Yinsen a plan for a metal suit, and says that is their ticket out. We then see Tony and Yinsen. I lied. This is actually where we see them sitting there playing a game. And Tony asks where he is from. That he's from a small town called Gormira. He then also asks him if Yinsen has a family. Yinsen tells. That's when Yinsen tells him that he's from a small town called Gormira, and that he does have a family, and that he will see them as soon as he leaves. And then sits there and he asks Tony, "What about you, Stark? Family?" And he's like, "Nah." And he's like, "Oh, the man who has everything really has nothing," showing that like money really isn't everything in the world. Like especially if you don't have anyone to share like your life with, it's, you know, pretty depressing. As like most like a lot of stories will actually say that. And he's just the person in this movie to actually say it. Yeah. So then we see all like the pieces of the suit sitting there laying out on the table, and we see one of like the head people sitting there getting kind of worried because it doesn't look like the picture. They kind of sit there and kind of question what are they actually working on, and they kind of sit there and like, oh, maybe he's making a modified version. Then the very like top head guy, I can't remember what his name is. I don't think his name is actually really said in the movie. if it is, and I just can't remember, for the life of me, leave it in the comments down below of what the guy's actual name was, because I'm pretty sure it's not said, but it could have been, and I just wasn't paying attention at all. He then sits there and picks up the plans, but like he hasn't like flattened them out to see them all together. He starts then questioning Jensen the most, because like he can't really talk to Tony all that much because he only knows like a little bit of English. He then makes his men take Jensen down to his knees and sits there and takes out a piece of hot coal and sits there and he's like, tell me the truth to Jensen, and he's like, it is the truth, and like they have like a whole little fight, and he's like, open your mouth then, because he's gonna put the coal in his mouth. Then Tony steps in and he's like, no, I need him. He's a really good right hand man. And then the guy's like, well, you have until tomorrow to assemble my missile. Then we actually sit there and we see them start like really cranking out, trying to make the soup. We actually also hear the official noise of the very beginning of the Infinity Saga. Since this was the very first movie in the MCU, they have deemed that this is that the noise in there is the very, very first noise you ever hear in the in the Infinity Saga, which is the smacking of a hammer on metal while Tony's sitting there creating the first Iron Man helmet. This sound actually makes a little comeback in another movie. It's just very, very faint if you can actually catch it. If not, I'll explain what movie it is in and what was the significance of it. Then we sit there, we see Tony sitting there preparing to suit up, putting all this random gear on before he puts the metal stuff on. Then we see two men sitting there knocking on the door, sitting there asking where Stark is. Jensen sits there and he's trying to talk to them, but he doesn't really know exactly what language they're talking in. And they go and try to open the door, and it blows up. And then the head guy, you sit there and you see him yell out yellow, 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 for them to go saying that they're kind of being attacked by Tony. Then Jensen actually sits there and he's trying to help Tony finish up, putting on all the stuff. And once the door is blown up, he sits there and he's like, we need more time. And Tony's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm gonna go buy you some more time. And he ends up picking up one of the dead guards' guns, running out, shooting it all right up in the air. And he runs right into a big group of men who also have guns. Then we just kind of don't see really what happens to Jensen, and we jump right back to Tony. We see a few men in there shooting at Stark in the Iron Man suit, which is actually, I want to say it's called Mark 1. He then sits there and he fights his way through all the men. Then we see, after he fights through all the men, we actually see Jensen sitting there in a pile of, I don't really know what it is. I want to say it's food, but it may not be. If you know exactly what it is that Jensen is actually sitting there laying on, put it in the comments down below, saying it's actually this. We actually see that, because Tony starts trying to walk over to him, and he's like, watch out, and we see the head guy sitting there, trying to, I think he has a bazooka, and he's sitting there trying to blow him up, and doesn't, and Tony fires back a missile at him, which blows up and kind of burns the whole, I want to say it's the left side of the guy's face off. Well, it's not in Dark Knight Rises where Harvey Dent's whole half of the face was burned off. It's not like that. It's just a subtle burn, to say. we sit there and then he goes and Tony goes up to Jensen and he tells him, "Oh, you need to get up. We need to get out of here. We have a plan and we need to stick to it. Basically, if he doesn't get out, that he's not ever going to see his family again." And then Jensen actually reveals to him that his family actually is dead. Jensen tells him that this is what he wants, because he wants to go and see his family again, and that it's all right for him to die. Tony then thanks him for saving his life, and Jensen actually tells him not to waste his life, to kind of basically change his legacy into something good and that Tony would want to be remembered for. Tony then ends up leaving and setting all the weapons on fire that were out in the base. Then he actually sits there and we see the first time the suit actually flies, and it only flies for very maybe a few seconds, and then we see him sitting there crash landing into a desert, which it was probably I don't know, I want to say it was only a few miles from where he was held, but it probably wasn't. If you actually have seen the trailers for Avengers Endgame, you will actually realize that this scene is actually seen in one of the trailers for Endgame. But yeah, just because they wanted to have a little callback from the very, very beginning of it. Then he ends up sitting there starting to walk, not really knowing where he's actually heading towards, just wandering, hoping that someone will actually find him. Then we see 3 helicopters appear in the air, and one of them actually has Rhodey in it. Then they get him back in. They get him into the helicopter, and they actually take him back to the States. And Pepper and Happy are actually sitting there waiting for him at the base that he returns to. Pepper then tells him that they need to go to the hospital to get him checked out because he's been gone and he could be injured. Tony then tells her there's only 2 things that he wants. Number 1 is an American cheeseburger, and number 2 is a press conference. They then drive to the press conference. As Tony's actually getting out, you see him pull out a burger from a Burger King bag. This idea of the burger, of having Burger King as the burger that he's eating, actually came from Robert Downey Jr. himself, who actually credits Burger King for actually helping him get off drugs in 2003. Because he actually said in an interview at one point that he was high on drugs. He went to Burger King to go get a burger, and it was the grossest burger he had ever had in his life. And that he looked at the man and the man who sold it to him and saw basically himself and the guy, and was like, "This is not where I want to go. I don't want to be someone who has to work at Burger King because I want to be working for money for drugs." And so that's when he completely quit drugs and that's when he started getting clean. And he credits Burger King for kind of opening his eyes to it. I thought that it was really sweet for him to actually sit there and pay a little tribute to Burger King in a small way for as a thank you for kind of helping realize that he didn't really want to throw his life away, and that he really wanted to just get back into acting. Actually, the director of this movie, he actually really pushed hard for Robert Downey Jr. to actually be able to play as Tony Stark, because almost every single person, when they were trying to figure out who they wanted, they were saying a bunch of other people, and when the director said Robert Downey Jr.'s name, they all said no, because they didn't want someone who was constantly on drugs, and someone who was just trying to get off drugs to be playing in their movie. And he's like, well, how about we just give him a shot? And that is how they brought him in for a test screening, and he did a really good job. The director said that he didn't really need to see anyone else once he saw Robert Downey Jr.'s, and that's how Robert Downey Jr. got the part. I thought that was like really interesting to kind of see that. To like read that. Then while they're at the press conference, we see Phil Coulson again. If you don't remember who Phil Coulson is, go watch the Captain Marvel breakdown trailer. Go pause this video and go watch it again because I mentioned him and I show you a picture of him. I don't really want to show you another picture because it's like the exact same. It would be the exact same photo, but he then says that he works for a government organization called SHIELD, but he actually does not call it SHIELD. This is actually I thought this was really weird because in Captain Marvel they do refer to SHIELD as SHIELD, and in Iron Man 1 Phil Coulson refers to it as the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division. I'll probably have a picture of the logo, so if you could not really understand what I was saying right there, you'll see it in writing. I thought it was really weird because they don't ever refer to it in Captain Marvel as this, and because they sit there and they constantly in Iron Man 1 are like, man, that's quite a mouthful, and he's, yeah, we know, we're trying to work on it, and so I thought it was really kind of weird, but I guess it was because since these both movies were filmed like quite a few years apart, that would probably be the reason why, because they were filmed almost 10 years apart from each other, so it kind of makes sense. And he's telling this Pepper that they need to make an appointment to talk to Tony about his escape, because that there's so many more things behind it. She then sits there and says, yeah, I'll look at the books and I'll get back to you. And he's like, okay, perfect. And then the press conference then starts. Tony tells everyone that he kind of goes into he never really got to say goodbye to his dad, and just different things. Then he tells everyone that Stark Industries will no longer be making weapons because he saw what his weapons were doing to innocent Americans, and that they were killing all of them, and that basically wasn't what he wanted to be known for. We then see Obadiah and Tony sitting there meeting at the arc reactor, which is the giant version of it, which is actually powering Tony's compound. He actually tells that to Jensen earlier in the movie, that he has a giant version of the arc reactor back at home. They then discuss the power behind Tony telling the public that they will no longer be making weapons. In this exchange, Obadiah tells Tony that they are ironmongers. This is actually going to, later in this movie, he creates a suit called the Ironmonger. And so it was just kind of like a foreshadowing a little bit there. But then Obadiah then tells Tony that he wants to kind of see the miniaturized arc reactor that's on his chest. But so then he's like, how will we just keep this between a secret? And then he's like, I want you to really lay low, don't go out anywhere it's public so that the press could see you and you kind of get in trouble for the company's sake. Then we sit there and we jump to Tony's house, and we see Pepper sitting there watching a show that is actually bashing Tony's idea for the no longer making weapons. Tony then sits there and I don't know what intercoms her, saying asking her how big are her hands. She then goes down to Tony's workshop asking why did he need her, because he's like, oh, show me your hands, and she's like, why? And then he tells her that he needs her help putting in a new arc reactor to replace the old one. She then replaces it and asks what does he want her to do with the old one. He tells her just throw it away or incinerate it. Then we jump to an Air Force base, I want to say a few days after this press conference, where Rhodey is actually sitting there going on showing people a tour of the base. He then kind of tells everyone to kind of leave him and Tony be so that they can kind of talk. Tony then tries to get Rhodey to listen to him about his new project. Rhodey then tells him that the military will be really, really happy once he tells when he releases the new idea. Tony tells him that it is not for the military, that it is because he doesn't want it in the military's hands. Rhodey then ends up just like blowing him off and is like, you know what, you need to take some time to get your situation straight and kind of figure out what's going on with you. Then we go jump back to Tony's workshop, and we see him and they're starting to work on the Iron Man suit Mark II. Then we go and jump back to Afghanistan, where the group that was holding Tony are actually sitting there finding bits and pieces of the Mark I. Then we jump back yet again to Tony's workshop, where he's sitting there working on Mark II. We see him sitting there testing the flying like boots, I guess you would call them. He then sits there and he's like, I think that he's going for like 10% thrust capacity, and he ends up sitting there and smacks himself into a wall. Then he sits there and he's starting to go back to the drawing boards and creating a like kind of a like hand part, like the hand parts. That scene actually is seen yet again not by Tony but by another character. I'll explain who it is when we get there and why it was kind of like a big thing. Then we see Pepper come down and she's like, "What? You didn't hear me paging you? Obadiah is upstairs." And he's like, "Oh, sorry." And that like he would basically be right up. And we see her actually sit there and bring a package and puts it down, but we don't actually see what's in the package quite yet. Then we see Tony go upstairs and go talk to Obadiah, and Obadiah tells him that the board, that it was a board of directors meeting that he was at in New York, and that the board wants to lock Tony out because they aren't making weapons anymore and they aren't really getting their money that they were getting in. Then Tony's like, because then he's like, "Oh, how I take the arc, basically the miniature arc reactor, we could sell these." And he's like, "No, this one stays with me." And he's just like, "Well, you got to give me something to pitch them, so that we can, so they don't lock you out, basically." And he's like, "No, that this is what he wants," and just like kind of blows Obadiah off. Then we see Tony sitting there trying to fly again. This time he actually successfully does it, because he has the boots and the hand parts. I can't remember what the exactly are called. If you remember and you want to tell me, put it in the comments down below and say it was this. We then see the suit being all finished, putting like little like armor on the around the whole outside of it. Then Tony's sister and he's like tells Jarvis, because Jarvis is uploaded to the suit, and he tells him that he wants to go out basically for a fly. Jarvis is saying, he's like, I really don't recommend that. And he's like, "Jarvis, sometimes you need to run before you can walk." And so then he ends up just sitting there taking it out. Then while Tony's actually out on his test fly, he starts going up, because he's like, "What's the maximum distance someone has ever gone up?" And Jarvis tells him, and he's like, "Oh, well, records are meant to be broken." While he's going up, the suit actually stalls because there's so much ice buildup on it. This is actually meant to be a parallel behind the classic story of Icarus. I don't really know how to say it exactly. It's from Greek mythology, who flew too close to the sun, and his wings actually melted. This was supposed to be a direct parallel to that whole scene. Tony then ends up, as he's sitting there falling to the ground, gets his suit to power right back up, right as he's about to hit the ground. he then ends up getting home and sets the suit off, and it ends up sitting there, and he then realizes that the suit is actually heavier than he thought, and it creates a giant hole in his roof, and actually he smashes one of his cars, and it was really, really depressing to see that. But then we actually finally get to see what is in the package that Pepper had brought him. This is actually his old arc reactor, and around it, it says, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. This actually, little trinket will actually make a little comeback in later movies. If you do know exactly what I'm referring to of when it comes back, don't say it, because that is like a really big spoiler. But I'll probably put a picture right here about, of the arc reactor, like little trinket that Pepper kind of makes him. Then yeah, then we jump back to Afghanistan where the Mark is all sitting there, like all laid out. Then we see Tony sitting there making modifications on the Mark II. Tony then sees that his company is throwing a party and decides to make an appearance at it, while the Mark III is being finished, because that's what his modifications on Mark II were, actually being turned into Mark III. Then Tony arrives, and that is where we actually see Stan Lee's cameo, which I will put a picture of right now. And it's him sitting there surrounded by a bunch of beautiful women, and he sits there and he's like, "You look great, Hef." Tony then goes in and meets Phil Coulson, and says that they because Phil Coulson's still sitting there ragging on him, saying that he needs to they need to meet, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll go to my assistant right now, and we'll set a date." Then that's when he kind of sees Pepper, goes up and asks her if she wants to go dance. He tells her that her dress looks beautiful. She reveals that that is actually what she got herself for her birthday from him for herself. She then tells him that she's actually really nervous, and she feels kind of awkward about sitting there dancing with him because she's dancing in front of a bunch of people that she works with, and that it's just really, really awkward for her. Then he ends up asking her, "Would you like to go out and go get some air?" And so then they do, and they sit there and they start talking about how awkward it is, kind of. Then Tony sits there and he's like, "You want me to go get some drinks?" And she's like, "Yeah, give me a martini, with 3 olives in it." And he's like, "Okay." So then he goes and runs to the bar. While he's at the bar, he sits there and he orders the 2 martinis, extra dry, extra dirty, extra whatever. With extra olives and all that. And while he's there, he actually runs into Christine again. She then reveals to him that although he has said that his company would stop making weapons and that they wouldn't be shipping them out anymore, she then reveals pictures of his his weapons in Afghanistan, and he's like, "When were these taken?" And she's like, "Yesterday." He then and he kind of realizes that his company is actually selling weapons to the Ten Rings. He then runs out to Obadiah and kind of questions him and is like, "What are you doing? Why, I thought we said that we were going to stop." And also Christine also reveals that the place that the weapons are at are actually in Gormira, which was Jensen's small village that he talked about. But he sits there and he is asking Obadiah, why are they still doing it? And he's like, I thought it was once I said that when I said, here's the line, we don't cross it, that it would kind of be a thing of no, we can't do that. Then Obadiah sits there and he whispers to him, saying, who do you think started the notion of locking Tony out? So then he kind of reveals that he didn't really want Tony kind kind of there, that he was going to just lock him out because he didn't like what he was doing. Yeah. So then, yeah. So then we end up seeing Tony suit up in the Mark III, and we see him actually fly to the town that the Ten Rings are at. Yeah, so then we see like the torturous conditions that are going on. We see a man who's been like taken like right in front of his family and is being told that he's about to be shot in front of his family. Then Tony flies in and sits there and saves the guy by killing all the bad guys. We then see Tony pull the guy from who was like part of the military that we saw. Pulls him out like out of a wall and kind of sits there and he's like, he's all yours. And then he sits there and he starts like flying away. And then he's actually shot out of the sky by a tank, which he actually, when he crash lands, he ends up blowing up. Then we go to Edwards Air Force Base in California, and we see that they are actually tracking Tony because they don't really know what he is, like what it is, and that he's in a no-fly zone. Rhodey is then called down to see what is going on. He then calls Tony, asking if he had any kind of equipment there, and he's like, okay, good, because Tony's like, no, I don't, it's not mine, and he's like, oh, good, because the Air Force is about to take this thing down. Tony then then finally after like a minute or two, Tony finally tells Rhodey that he is the bogey that the Air Force is trying to shoot down, and he's like, oh, yeah, and he's like, what? And he's like, no, it's not a suit, it's me, I'm actually in it. Then he actually smacks into a plane and actually crashes one of the planes. Then we actually, when he gets home, we see him start taking off the damaged Iron Man armor, and Pepper actually catches him. If you look at the left side of Tony, you can actually see a prototype of Captain America's shield sitting on his workbench. I will put a picture of it right here. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I found that, like, I read that somewhere, and I immediately, when I was rewatching it, I was like, oh my god, I never realized that was right there. Then we go to what I am actually pretty sure is Afghanistan again, and we see Obadiah meeting with the leader, of who was, captured Tony. Obadiah then tells him that if he had killed Tony when he was supposed to, he'd still have a face. And then Obadiah sees the Mark I of the Iron Man suit, and the man tells Obadiah that he will give the suit to him as a gift in trade of iron soldiers. He's then the dude's actually then killed, and all his men are killed by the men that Obadiah brings with him. We then see Tony sitting there asking Pepper to go to Stark Industries to get some shipping information that once she gets it for him and he finds where they are going, he will destroy the weapons. Tony then tells Pepper that he shouldn't be alive unless it was for a reason, and that he feels like he's doing the right thing. He then we see Pepper going and getting the thing that Tony wanted, but while there, she finds a bunch of other files and downloads them to the thing for him, including a video of Tony from when we saw the dudes in there with a video camera. That we actually see the video from that. We then see Obadiah walk in, and Sister is talking to Pepper about Tony and how he's changed since he got back. She then switches off the computer because she realizes that Obadiah is the one who actually had planned for Tony to be killed. Then she turns off the computer so that Obadiah can't really see what she was doing. Then as she's leaving, Obadiah sees that that she has a paper that she's like trying to hide the little file that she was getting in, and he's like, "Oh, is that today's paper? Can I have it? I want to do the puzzle." And she's like, "Oh yeah, of course." And so she gives it to him, and then he turns on the computer and actually sees what Pepper had done, was like getting. Then as Pepper is leaving, she runs into Agent Phil Coulson again. And he's like, "Oh, did you forget about our like meeting?" And she's like, "No, we're gonna have it right now. You're gonna have the meeting of your life." Then we see Obadiah go to the arc reactor, where a group of scientists are attempting to build another miniature of the arc reactor. We then see this one scientist. I will have a picture of him right here. He actually makes a comeback later in the MCU. He sits there and he's like, "Oh, that he can't really make that he can't make what Obadiah wants." And he's like, "Well, Tony Stark made this in a cave with a box of scraps." And he's like, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm not Tony." Then we see Tony sitting there at home and grabbing the phone to go talk to Pepper. We see that then see Obadiah sitting there using this one little machine to actually paralyze Tony. Like it's a brief paralyzing so that he can actually sit there and steal Tony's arc reactor. Obadiah then tells Tony that he wasn't that he's actually gonna go kill Pepper. Pepper then sits there. She calls Rhodey and tells him to go check on Tony. We then see Tony sitting there trying to like crawl to the workspace so that he can go get his old arc reactor that Pepper did a little thing for. Yeah. Then we see the Ironmonger Mark II as Obadiah is putting the arc reactor in it and powering it up. Then we go back to Tony and see his seeing his old reactor, and he's just out of reach of it, and one of his robots actually gets it for him, and he breaks it open. Then we see Pepper is sitting there with Phil Coulson still, and they're about to go arrest Obadiah Stane, which Rhodey tells, because Rhodey ends up getting there and finding Tony like kind of paralyzed and stuff, yeah, and tells him that that she's with a group of agents that are about to go arrest Obadiah. Yeah. Then we see Tony sitting there suiting up. Rhodey's like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." Then as Tony leaves, we see Rhodey looking at the Mark II, which he actually rares in Iron Man, where he actually like kind of steals it in Iron Man 2. And he's like, "Next time, baby." And then takes one of Tony's cars and because he's like, because Tony tells him that all he needs is him to keep the skies clear. We then see Tony flying in to go save Pepper and takes out Obadiah. They then have like a big battle. All throughout this battle, Tony's chest plate is actually losing power because Jarvis is actually sitting there telling him that like how much power is left. Then while they're on, they actually get to the roof of Stark Industries, where the big arc reactor is. Tony then tells Pepper to blow up the arc reactor, and when she does that, then she ends up doing it. Obadiah ends up taking all the power in it, ends up getting killed. Actually, in the original draft of the movie, he actually survived the final battle and was actually being planned to reappear in Iron Man 2 somewheres, but it ended up not happening. I'm not 100% sure why it didn't happen. Maybe the actor didn't really like his character, like in Captain America, the guy who played Red Skull didn't really like his character. I don't really know. So then then they end up having like another press conference. It's called to talk about the final battle and say how it wasn't really like Tony in there, and that and kind of have like a whole like fake story of what actually happened. Actually, while they were filming the scene, all the extras who played the reporters were actually told that this was actually a dream sequence, so that they would not go spoil it on the internet. Which I bet people still try to go and spoil it on the internet because that's how people are. So then we see Tony sitting there preparing a statement that Phil Coulson has given him on cards on what to say. Phil Coulson also finally says to call the organization S.H.I.E.L.D. that he works for. And Tony and Pepper then sit there and like flirt with each other. He then goes out and goes and makes the statement saying that he had no idea what really happened on the roof top, and that then the movie actually ends with him saying the final lines of "I am Iron Man." That actually is like really significant because I want to say in another like a few movies that's how he ends the movie is by saying "I am Iron Man." I think it's like 3 other movies he says it, and that's how it ends. But then luckily there is actually a secret post-credit scene. If you have not seen it, I'll probably put a link down below of so you guys can go watch it because I think it was pretty awesome. I thought that I really liked it. I thought that it was a really good way of tying it into all the other MCU movies. In it, Nick Fury appears in Tony's house. Nick Fury then says, "I am Iron Man. You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet." He then reveals to him that he is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. He then says, "I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative," and that is the whole thing. And actually, fun fact about this scene. The scene was completely shot by a skeleton crew. The only actors who knew about it was Samuel L. Jackson and Robert Downey Jr. They were the only ones who actually had seen that part of the script. So everyone else who was in the movie, who went to go see it, it was actually a very big surprise for them. Also, apparently, according to John, the director, John Beus, or however I said it before, I don't know how to really say it. It was actually very difficult for them to choose the villain for Iron Man 1 for him to face, since almost all the villains that he fights in the comic books are very, very powerful, and it would seem really unrealistic. There'll be a very unrealistic movie if Tony creates the Iron Man suit in the first act and then battles a near god in the second. I thought that was like pretty interesting. Also, I found out like kind of the reason why they actually replaced the guy who played Rhodey was because no one really liked him actually, and he was him and the director didn't really get along very well, and him and Robert Downey Jr. actually did not get along together at all. There was constantly fights on the set, and so they then just asked him, "Nope, don't even come back," because they said that he was just so terrible, and so they didn't really want him back. And that is why we got Don Cheadle, who will be seen in Iron Man 2 when I talk about it, because I'm gonna post a photo of him because I thought he was like an amazing roadie. But so that is it. That is the whole Iron Man 1 movie broken down for you guys. If you guys think I missed something, like, oh my god, how could you miss this? This was so big. Leave in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit that like button down below too. Don't forget to, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you can get all this amazing content of like the craziness of the MCU from my mind. And I will catch you guys on the next video. See ya.